This is Whitley Strieber. Welcome to Dreamland and welcome to the new unknowncountry.com. Before we go on to Dreamland, I'd like to talk to you just for a couple of moments about the new unknowncountry.com. There are many new things you can do. You can report a sighting or encounter, do it either anonymously or identifying yourself in our report sighting or encounter link. Every day, the Strange Days section offers you a new strange story for that particular day of the year. In addition, the Out There section is much enhanced. It has direct video access now. The news stories are much enhanced. As you can see, the site itself is really pretty attractive, and it has much more access to archives. You can see just what a large archive we have on unknowncountry.com. Plus, the search engine is now very powerful, so you can search unknowncountry.com. Also, after logging in, when you navigate to the subscriber homepage, you will see the whole archive open up to your right, dated by year and by archive area. We're going to be adding to those archive areas to make it even easier to navigate the vast treasury of information on this website. These are just some of our changes. We're looking to do much more. We're going to be expanding our links to other websites section dramatically, for example. So if you have a website you particularly like and would like to see up there, or you own such a website, please send a link to unknowncountry.com. Also, for our subscribers, we have a new $3.95 a month subscription. If you'd prefer to do that, that's now available as well. And it's much easier to subscribe. It's much easier to use the subscriber area. It is much easier to gain your password when you lose it. So that area has all been greatly streamlined and enhanced as well. Dreamland is now available both to listen to on the website and to download from iTunes. You can download it from iTunes by going to iTunes Store, then to Podcasts, then search on Dreamland, and you can even set it to download to your iTunes automatically every week. You can listen on Radio Time on your smartphone or on Wonder Radio on your smartphone as well. And we are looking to restore the download feature from the website itself for those of you who used that. That was inadvertently left out of the website, and we intend to restore it. So, altogether, the new Unknown Country, a huge step ahead. This is the largest website of its kind in the world. It is a vast treasury of information. It has a new, powerful search engine, as well as much more access to the stories and archives we do possess, which are indeed extensive. Thank you very much for coming to unknowncountry.com and Dreamland, and we hope that we deserve the support that you give us.
This is Whitley Strieber's Dreamland 2010, our 10th anniversary year. Whitley Strieber's Dreamland takes you where others dare not go, to the limits of imagination and reality and beyond. Expert hosts like Jim Mars, Marla Fries, Ann Strieber, and Linda Moulton Howe are what make us special. And of course, Whitley Strieber, the world's leading authority on the unknown. Dreamland, welcome to the edge of the world.
Well, I am excited today. We have not had Dean Radin with us since 2006, and that's way, way too long. In 2006, in September of 2006, for you subscribers, if you would like to listen to this great show and to Dean Radin in a previous incarnation on Dreamland from 2006, go to the subscriber section and click on the Dreamland archive, and you can just scroll down or click or use your browser to find Radin, R-A-D-I-N, 9/16/2006, the Entangled Minds interview. It's fantastic. Because it's about, and I think the best thing, we'll just reprise that a little bit at the beginning of the show. Dean Radin is one of the remarkable minds of our time, in my opinion. And I have any number of reasons for saying that. One of which we'll discuss in a few moments is that Dean and I just finished, and Anne, among many other people, just finished spending 4 or 5 days at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, where Dean gave what has to be one of the most extraordinary presentations I've ever heard in my life. It was really, really phenomenal. He is senior scientist at the Institute for Noetic Sciences. He is adjunct faculty in the Department of Psychology at Sonoma State University. He is the article of any number of books of one of the great classics of consciousness, The Conscious Universe. HarperCollins, I believe, published it in 1997. It is now available in paperback. It's gone through at least 20 printings, and it is as current today as it was the day it was written. More recently, in 2006, he published Entangled Minds, which I thought was an extraordinary book because it explained psychic phenomena scientifically, and that is what Dean Radin does and can do so well. He understands why the phenomenal world, this unusual world that we're all so interested in, is real. Dean, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much, Whitley. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, it's been too long, and I'm very glad to be back. Dean, at the Esalen Institute, you presented a paper that just blew everyone away. And it is a lot of your latest research on things like the way random numbers can be used predictively and in an organized manner. And then you also got into things like the relationship between the Earth and the Sun and what solar energy does to the human mind. And the result of this is, I almost don't know where to start. I think the place to start, though, is with the entangled mind and why it is that such things as psychic phenomena probably actually do exist. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, when you look at the history of the study of psychic phenomena, it's over 100 years now that science has tried to look at these experiences that people report and make some sort of sense out of it. I would say for at least the first 80 years or so, most of the effort went into simply testing to see whether we could believe that these things were true. Because the scientific worldview that had developed over the last 500 years systematically excluded the idea that consciousness might exist outside your brain. And so there's a lot of belief and prejudice, really, in the neuroscience community today that refuses to accept the concept or even the possibility that brain and mind are not the same thing. But over the past, as I said, the past 100 years, people have nevertheless still been looking at whether or not instances of psychic phenomena, which suggests that brain and mind are not the same thing, they find more and more good scientific reasons involving controlled tests and under laboratory conditions, in some cases double-blind protocols, to test whether things like telepathy and clairvoyance and precognition, if those could really be true. And I would say that for a good half century the jury was out, but the jury is now in. And if the evidence were presented to a scientific jury, then I believe the jury would come back with a verdict of, we now can accept that these things are real.
Now, go ahead.
So then the shift, the emphasis then for the few researchers who have been doing this actively, it shifted about 20 years ago from could we believe that this is real into how do we begin to understand how they can be real. And that was more or less the topic that I focused on in the book Entangled Minds.
And I thought it was just an absolutely marvelous book and also a terrific interview. Interestingly enough, subsequently, in recent years, it's been discovered that quantum entanglement, and you can define that for us in just a moment, is present inside the brain. In other words, their neurons have communicate in part with each other using quantum entanglement, at least in the brains of, I believe there were mice that were studied, and that would probably mean that all brains do this. What exactly is quantum entanglement, and why does it have such significance in terms of what we have in the past called paranormal states?
Entanglement was a bad English translation of the term, which original term was in German, and offered by Erwin Schrödinger, one of the founders of quantum mechanics. And a better English translation of his term is entwined or enfolded. And the image that comes to mind is like your arms crossed over your chest. It's an enfolding of two states so that they're not entangled like you can imagine a ball of string that's randomly entangled, but rather entwined in a very precise way. So they're the states get stuck together. This idea came out of the mathematics of quantum mechanics, where the equations predicted that if two or more particles interacted, that once they interact, there's a new component that's created, which is the combination of both of the original particles. And the curious thing is that new component never goes away, and it exists outside of space and time. And so for many years, this was simply a mathematical curiosity. Like many equations in physics predict things that seem ridiculous. And so they're not, we don't pay much attention to them. We just throw away those solutions to the equations. But this is a solution that people didn't think much about. In fact, Einstein didn't like it and called it, it can't possibly be true because it predicts something like spooky action at a distance. Namely,
right.
Two things interact, they go on their merry way, but the equation said, well, it looks like the two things went on their way, but there's still some component which is both. It's both of them. They're connected in some way. So it took 30 years before the physicist John Bell came up with an idea of a way to test to see if this entanglement was real or not. And then another 10 years before people started doing experiments. And by now, many experiments have been done, and in fact, even technologies are being developed based on what we know is a fact, which is that at some level, which you can't see with your eye very well, anything that has ever interacted is connected in some way. And those connections don't go away. And so one of the implications of this, proposed by physicists who have thought about this, is that if the Big Bang theory is correct, then everything was entangled from the get-go, and everything still is entangled. And that leads you to a holistic view of the universe. It must still all be connected in some way. The challenge to us is finding ways of detecting whether the entanglements are there. And so we can do that now in the physics lab with elementary particles, and we're beginning to be able to do it in living systems. But that's right on the cutting edge right now. Living systems are much more complex. But we're able to detect these effects so far in photosynthesis, in proteins responsible for photosynthesis.
Exactly.
So
how do you mean? How would the effects be detected, and what is being detected?
Well, in the case of elementary particles, what you can do is create an entangled pair of electrons or photons or any particle, really. You can do a measurement on one, and then if you look at the other, you'll find that it has taken on the property which is correlated with the original measurement. That doesn't sound all that surprising, except that because it sounds simply like a correlation. And so the metaphor that I use to describe the difference between a classical correlation and a quantum correlation is a child's swing set. So the classical correlation, imagine you have two swings next to each other, and you have two children and you're pushing them so they're kind of swinging together with each other in sync. And now you magically separate the swing set so both children keep swinging, but you separate them so they're 1,000 miles apart. And they're swinging it the same way. So now you could have somebody looking at one child swinging, And because they know that that swing is correlated with the other, because of the way that you set it up, then every time the child swings forward, you know that the other one has to be swinging forward too. And when the other one swings back, the other one must be swinging back. So this is kind of a trivial understanding or knowledge because of the correlation between two systems. That's a classical correlation. The quantum part comes in. Let's say you're pushing one of the children in one of the swings and you decide to impart a little twist. So they're not just swinging back and forth, but now they're sort of swinging side to side a little bit. If the other person was now paying attention, they would find that their child was also swinging side to side. In fact, the moment that you decided you were going to twist your push a little bit on one child's swing, the other child's swing would twist as well. That's a quantum correlation, and that is extremely different from any form of classical correlation, not only because the two are connected in some weird way, but because the speed of the connection between twisting the child's swing in one end and it showing up in the other end is instantaneous. It doesn't take any time at all for that to happen. And this has been demonstrated in the laboratory many times now to the best of our ability to do timing measurements on the Earth. But we know that the speed with which these entangled particles are connected is more than 10,000 times the speed of light. That's the best that we're able to measure so far. That is very likely then to really be instantaneous. And the equations predict that these connections that we're talking about are not actually in space-time. They're somehow outside of space-time, and we can measure their effects.
Now, when we get back, we're going to ask Dean a very simple question, and we're going to get, since I've heard his talks and read his books, one of the most interesting answers you've ever heard. And I'm going to ask him simply this: is the mind outside of space-time? We'll be right back.
You're listening to Dreamland. Serious wonder spoken here.
We're talking to Dean Radin, his website, deanradin.com, his two phenomenal books, The Entangled Mind and The Conscious Universe, two of the great all-time books of the consciousness movement and about consciousness that you will ever read. And the reason is the same thing that we talked about with Dean in 2006. They're empowering. Empowerment is what Dreamland is all about and what Unknown Country is all about. The yes you can aspect of this is we are told from school children, from babyhood, that we are only our physical bodies, and we live in a world in which we only see our physical selves, and we lose contact. We become literally soul blind and anesthetized to the greater reality in which we live, which is actually a much, much greater reality. Before we left the air, we were talking about things that moved 10,000 times the speed of light that science detects and can detect reliably every day. Later, we're going to be talking about the relationship between all of this and randomness and the fact that there are extraordinary means of prediction that are just coming down the pike that Dean knows all about. But first, Dean, what is the mind in relation to the brain? Or dare I ask the question that broadly?
Well, of course, it is a complicated issue, and I think a growing number of scientists are beginning to achieve a level of humility to accept that we may not be able to ever answer that question. And this is because, as Einstein and others had said, that if you're trying to solve a problem, you can't solve it from within the same scope of the problem itself. So it's not clear at this point that consciousness can figure out what consciousness is. You need to be beyond consciousness or larger or something like that. So we don't know yet, but of course that's not going to stop us from trying. And so the neurosciences have a couple 100-year history of looking at the brain very carefully and looking at the correlations between conscious experience and now unconscious experience and what is happening in the brain. And so that whole lineage is a very comprehensive look at the neural correlates of consciousness. And there's no doubt that the brain is related in some way to consciousness. The question is, does it generate consciousness? Is that where it's made? And I would say that the evidence from people looking at aspects of non-local mind, and in the old days we might call it psi research or parapsychology, we're beginning to use new terms now, but the idea is that if there is a way, for example, for someone to gain knowledge about an image or a target that's beyond your ordinary senses, far beyond, thousands of miles away, if that is possible, then it provides a very strong challenge to the idea that the brain and the mind are the same. And there's plenty of evidence that people can do that. We have lots of evidence for telepathy, for precognition, for clairvoyance, and evidence for mind-matter interaction. All four of those classes provide strong evidence that mind and brain are not identical. They're related, but not identical. And the way that they're not identical is in the direction of what we're beginning to learn through physics about the nature, the deep structure of reality, in which the concept of non-locality plays a very important role. So the point of my book, Unentangled Minds, was basically to ask a what-if statement. The what-if is, what if our experience, some aspect of our conscious experience, is entangled in the same way that we see in elementary physics? And the answer is that if that were so, then we should expect in our experience to have non-local elements, non-local things happening. That means that you would be connected to things that are elsewhere. They're not inside you. And if that happened at the level of your thoughts, you might experience it as telepathy. And if it happened at the level of your perception, you might call it clairvoyance. And if it happened at a level of intention, then we might call it a mind-matter interaction. So what we're doing is recasting old metaphysical terms now into terms where we're just beginning to glimpse some science underneath it.
We live at a time when what is arguably one of the most terrible events in history unfolding. An oil company, negligent, greedy oil company, and I say that unequivocally because BP has a long history of spills and poor management. Their Prudhoe Bay spill was because of rusted out pipes and in their pipeline, and they didn't care for them properly, and they had been told again and again and again by the federal authorities to take care of this, and they never did. So they have a history. In any case, this terrible event is unfolding with unknown consequences for the world, but it now appears more and more as if the spill is unstoppable. And this gets me to an enormous question. We could be in the process of destroying our oceans forever. Now, is there anything in terms of psychic or collective intention that might be possible to help this situation?
That's a tough question. So far, everything that we know about mind-matter interaction suggests that the interactions are real, but they're also extremely weak. Now, we know this because most of the experiments have involved one individual targeted at a very sensitive physical system, either a random system like a random number generator or falling dice or bubbles in water, other kinds of physical systems which can be very precisely measured, but they also require a very small amount of energy in order to push them around. So we can see these effects in such systems, but it's nowhere near as straightforward as it may seem. For example, that if you get an effect with one person, and if you say, well, let's just get 10 more people and we'll get 10 times the effect. Well, it doesn't work that way. Also, if you create a system which is much more sensitive, maybe you can get more clear results. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case either. When you look at the whole range of data that's available, one of the suggestions is that what we're dealing with are informational changes in systems, not force-like. And this is important because if you imagine that magically if you got 7 billion people in the world to imagine that the oceans are clean, whatever we're dealing with is not going to act like force. And it probably won't scale up to be times 7 billion either. There could be an informational change. Now, how information is at the root of everything, so it's more fundamental than energy. But I don't know how I don't know what I would ask people to try to produce in the case of a massive oil spill, because there's already so much out there that what do we imagine that would happen? That it would all disappear? Or turn into chocolate syrup? I mean, I don't know.
It can't disappear, unfortunately, and it also apparently can't be stopped. They're saying now that the seafloor has fractured, and the oil is coming out through the fractured seafloor. So it's possible that not even relief wells drilled there are going to help. So it's a desperate human situation.
Yes, it is. And so I think your overarching question is, does collective intention do something?
Right.
And the answer, I think, is yes. Yeah, we have evidence that it does. But in a case like this, which is a world catastrophe, we need to be very clear on exactly what it is that we want to do. Because if we can do something, we don't want to accidentally make it worse. So at this point, I don't know how to suggest what the right thing to suggest is. And by the same token, sometimes people say, well, let's all pray for peace. That's a laudable thing to do, except that the definition of what world peace means is not clear to me at all. That simply the way that civilizations run, the way that business runs, the way that politics run, conflict seems to be necessary. Well, can we have maybe no war? Well, I hope so. But again, we need to be extremely clear on what we mean by that. And part of the reason for requiring clarity is because the evidence suggests that while you can scale up small mind-matter or interaction effects, in order to scale it up, all of the people involved have to be extremely coherent, meaning they all have to be thinking exactly the same way about the same thing. Otherwise, it basically interferes with itself, and you end up with nothing.
Which means that someone who's intentionally seeking to interfere with it can do so quite easily.
They can do the equivalent of massive intention is a little bit like a soap bubble. It's real, it can persist, but it's also very fragile. And if you get one person who says, oh, no, you don't, it could pop it. And that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to not only to see these effects in the laboratory, but to get real-world effects, which I believe actually could take place, but they're just so difficult to maintain.
When we get back, we're going to get into another area. Dean at Esalen talked about the use of random number generators and some truly remarkable material. And then later on in the show, the sun plays a tremendous role in our lives, and Dean has gone into just what effect solar storms have here on Earth in the human community. And it's remarkable material. Dean's website is deanradin.com. His two books, The Conscious Universe and Entangled Minds, both of them all-time classics. I have nothing further to say about them than that, and coming from me, that's a great recommendation. Suffice to say this, we get 10 or 15 books a week for Dreamland. Two of those books are still on my shelf and always will be. They are The Conscious Universe and Entangled Minds, along with a small number of others that I think are genuinely keepers, and these certainly are. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland Online.
Dean Radin is with us. Dean Radin, his website, deanradin.com. We have been getting ready to talk about some remarkable studies involving random numbers. Could you tell us a little bit about what you told us at the Esalen Institute about these studies and the discoveries that are being made? Well,
you're referring to the project called the Global Consciousness Project.
Yes.
Which was started by Roger Nelson at Princeton University over 12 years ago, and it's still running. It's a worldwide network of electronic random number generators. These are little circuits, just a couple of inches square, that do only one thing. They generate streams of random bits, zeros and ones. And they're very carefully designed so that each bit is truly independent of the next bit, and also that they're equiprobable. So the likelihood of getting a 0 or a 1 is the same on every single trial, and each trial is independent of the next. So that's as good a truly random sequence as you can create.
Right.
The reason for, and so we have 65 or 70 of these devices in major cities around the world, and they've been running for 12 years, 24/7. The purpose of this is to study the idea of collective mind, to see whether there is something like a collective consciousness out there, as postulated by people like Carl Jung and Teilhard de Chardin and Sri Aurobindo and many others, who have proposed that the humans have not finished evolution. We're still evolving, and we're evolving into something that will transcend what we currently are. Words like we're Homo sapiens now, and words like Homo superius or Homo noeticus have been proposed as where we seem to be headed. And one of the predictions of this idea of a collective mind is, as Aurobindo used the word supermind, and Teilhard de Chardin used the word omega point, to suggest that there is something in our future that is pulling us. Evolution doesn't just push from behind, but it pulls us towards something. And that something may be the equivalent of a much bigger mind. As though we're neurons in a giant brain, well, maybe Gaia, as the planet, is becoming conscious through us. So that's a background on why we thought of doing this experiment in the first place, is to look for evidence of the giant mind. But it's tricky because if indeed we're the equivalent of neurons inside a giant brain, then imagine a neuron in your brain that wakes up one day and starts wondering, I wonder if I'm living in a community of other minds that actually make a brain. Well, there are 100 billion neurons in your brain. How would they figure out if there's actually a unitary consciousness beyond them? It's not so easy. So what we're doing is nevertheless taking up the challenge, and we used our random number generators because these are devices that are designed to produce maximum entropy. That means maximum amounts of randomness. And the reason why that's useful is because, as I mentioned earlier, that it looks like mind-matter interaction involves informational changes, not energetic or force-like changes. And in order to detect an informational change, what you want is a device which responds to information, or especially to informational changes, very precisely and quickly. And so through the use of statistics, you could look at what should be noise and see if order is beginning to appear. And so we have a number of different ways, statistically defined order, that we look for in the random generators during periods when there are large-scale events taking place in the world. And so we now have, as of today, we have 335 large-scale events that we've looked at. The last one was the attacks on the flotilla outside of the Gaza Strip by Israel, and many, many other things like that. These are events that have captured the world's media and attention. And what we can do with these events is assess whether or not the random generators are behaving randomly or whether there's unexpected patterns that show up. If the random generators were not being influenced in any way, then after these 335 events, we would end up basically with a chance result. But in fact, as of May 2010, we end up with odds against chance, which are a few 100 million to 1. So we're approaching 1 billion to 1 now. This means that, actually, no, I take it back, we're actually beyond 1 billion already. Yeah, it's beyond 1 billion to 1. So that means that the accumulation of these events that we've looked at, 335 events, achieving odds greater than 1 billion to 1, it means that during large-scale events that attract a lot of the world's attention, that our environment is not as random as it should be. And we can check this, and we have checked it against other times. So the 335 events is only a few percent of this 12-year database, because these worldwide events generally take place over the course of a day or a couple of hours. And so most of the database is nothing happened, at least nothing happened worldwide. So you can take these events and you can take them all and imagine you can slide them in time, forward and backwards in time. So the way we evaluate them now is that they're locked in time, in sync with when the event actually occurred. That's where we find these odds of 1 billion to 1. If we start slipping all of them into the future and slipping them into the past, the results go down to chance, which means that what we've been looking at then in these little slices of time during these worldwide events, something strange happens to randomness. It begins to go away. This suggests that there is something like collective mind, because this is the equivalent of what we see in the laboratory when we have one individual aiming their intention or their attention at a single random number generator. One individual can push the randomness around a little bit, and that's what we seem to be seeing now in the scope of the entire globe.
And so give us some examples of what exactly happens that choose an event and tell us what happened surrounding this event. I want you to make the choice of the event.
Okay, so let's take the last one, the Israel attacking the flotilla outside of the Gaza Strip.
Right, that's recently, yes.
Right. So one way of a metaphor of what's going on here is a tsunami detector. In order to detect a tsunami in the ocean, a tsunami, of course, is caused by an earthquake under the ocean and creates a swell that can extend for thousands of miles under the ocean. And by the time it reaches the shore, you have this massive wave, which, of course, as we've seen historically, can wipe out a few 100,000 people who happen to live near the shore, because they don't expect a wave that's 50 feet high or more. So to detect a tsunami, you put lots of buoys all throughout the ocean, and each buoy is sending via radio signal. It's sending all kinds of information, but just say it's sending its height. And so if you look at all of the signals coming from thousands of buoys, and you show them on a screen, or you play a tone associated with each height, you would hear just static, and you would see just randomness on the screen, because the relationship between all of these buoys is random, that they're all bobbing up and down all differently all the time. If a tsunami occurs, and you now have this massive wave or swell throughout the entire ocean, then suddenly thousands of buoys are all going to start lining up, because they're all going to float up at the same time when the wave hits them, and then they'll float down when the wave goes away. That will be instantly seen as a massive, unexpected form of order in these buoys, and that's how you know that a tsunami took place. So when Israel attacked this flotilla, what we saw instantly covered in the world media was a lot of attention being paid. And so this is unusual in terms of imagining 7 billion acts of attention in all these minds out there. Suddenly, they all became coherent, because they're all paying attention to, something's happening that I need to pay attention to.
And this is this affects random number generators.
It affects randomness around the world, yes.
Good Lord. The implications of that are just staggering. But when we get back, we're going to go even farther, because there is something being discovered about the relationship with the sun that has stunning implications. And recently we had David Sereda on the show, who talked a little bit about this. We're going to get a little bit more into the science of this with Dean. We'll be right back. Dean Radin's website, simple to remember, deanradin.com, DeanRadin.com. his two books, The Conscious Universe and Entangled Minds. Unforgettable, incredibly useful, profoundly empowering. Now, Dean, at Esalen, you talked about something that I found absolutely fascinating, and that is that there is a relationship between human activity and, for example, the stock market and solar activity. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's been known for probably a half century or more that the geomagnetic field is closely related to all kinds of human behavior and human health. And you see this, everything from when there's a geomagnetic storm, which means that the Earth's magnetic field is very, very weak, but it's been measured for a long time, since the 1800s. And there are well understood fluctuations in the magnetic field of the Earth. That field is strongly influenced, especially in terms of storms, meaning it becomes very agitated. It's strongly influenced by the sun, because if the sun has a solar flare or solar particles that coming from the sun hit the magnetosphere, it starts it ringing like a bell. And when that occurs, rates of domestic violence go up, and people have bleeding problems, start bleeding more, and the stock market goes down, and on and on and on. It's a well understood, well studied effect, which we think might have something to do with the fact that we have magnetic field sensors in us. For a long time, we had no idea how we could sense such a thing, but now we know that brains have magnetite actually in them, little parts of magnetic material, so we are sensitive to magnetic fields. And so when a geomagnetic storm comes along, not only will it affect our health and behavior, but if it's a really bad storm, it'll introduce currents in the electrical power system, and it'll start creating blackouts. It'll just overpower the system. So if we're unlucky and a massive solar flare hits the Earth, all hell is going to break loose. Everything from our electronic infrastructure being affected in a bad way to health and behavior being affected in a bad way. We're very sensitive to it. So one of the reasons I spoke about this at Esalen is because I'm thinking about the nature of collective mind. We're looking for other clues, that there may be something like a Gaia mind, literally a mind the size of the planet, consciousness. Well, since we know that we individually are affected by geomagnetic storms, we thought, maybe the whole planet, the planetary consciousness, is affected by geomagnetic storms as well. So what we did is we looked at one of the more dramatic events in the Global Consciousness Database, which was the attacks on 9/11, 2001. And we looked at what has happened in the geomagnetic field on that day. And as it turned out, that the attacks that occurred unfolded, or at least publicly unfolded, around 8:30 in the morning Eastern Time. And if you look at the geomagnetic observatories, there are both ones on the Earth, and there are some satellites in geosync orbit. Almost all of them showed at 8:30 in the morning a dramatic change. We're talking about the entire Earth's geomagnetic field suddenly changed when that first plane hit the World Trade Center. And afterwards, for days, it was extremely different. Now, one way of thinking of this is in terms of variance. So if you're looking at the signal before 9/11, a couple of days before 9/11, it was a quiet signal. It wasn't jumping around a lot. Right. It's showing understood diurnal effects in the planet, but it's a smooth curve. 9/11 happens, and suddenly you have a very jagged curve from that moment on for a couple of days. So on the Earth, it's maybe not too surprising why you suddenly see this, because there's a big change in the way that we're using our electronics at that time. Everyone's turning on the radio and their television and everything. It could create something that is measurable on Earth. But we also saw this effect in the geosync satellites, which are 22,000 miles up. They're way out there, and they're measuring the geomagnetic field way out in space, and that showed the effect too, which means it wasn't just a terrestrial effect on our magnetics. It was actually literally the size of the entire planet and beyond, up to at least 22,000 miles. So the two ways of interpreting this. One is that there just happened to be a magnetic storm that had occurred virtually exactly in sync with these terrible events unfolding in the Earth. That's possible. It may have been a coincidence. Or it may have been that all kinds of machinery turned on. I mean, who knows what sort of space platforms, observation platforms we may have that got turned on suddenly to do counterterrorism stuff. That's possible too. The third possibility, though, which is much more radical, but it might be true, is that we're seeing the equivalent of a glitch in Gaia's mind. And this is it's a difficult correlation to jump. You need a leap of faith to even entertain this hypothesis. But it suggests that that the behavior of the geosphere itself, the magnetics, the geomagnetism, possibly the relationship with the sun, possibly the relationship with where the moon is at the time, lots of other things, may all be involved in one giant, not coincidental reflection of something like consciousness at a very, very large scale. And so imagine now you're a neuron in your brain, and as a neuron you don't know that you're a part of an experiment. But let's say that the brain is part of an experiment, and the experiment involves flashing a light that the brain is going to see.
Well, Dean, we have run out of time on this week's Dreamland, and I thank you very much for being with us. Dean Radin's new book, The Conscious Universe, and subscribers, do not miss the interview that Ann Strieber did with Nick. It is extraordinary and chilling. What is happening in human life today? The lives of the close encounter witnesses and the abductees are absolutely extraordinary. These are people living way out at the edge, and this is the only place in the world where you can hear their true voices. And to Dean Radin, in a previous incarnation on Dreamland from 2006, go to the subscriber section and click on the Dreamland archive, and you can just scroll down or click or use your browser to find Radin, R-A-D-I-N, 9/16/2006, the Entangled Minds interview. It's fantastic because it's about, and I think the best thing, we'll just reprise that a little bit at the beginning of the show. Dean Radin is one of the remarkable minds of our time, in my opinion. And I have any number of reasons for saying that. One of which we'll discuss in a few moments is that Dean and I just finished, and Ann, among many other people, just finished spending 4 or 5 days at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, where Dean gave what has to be one of the most extraordinary presentations I've ever heard in my life. It was really, really phenomenal. He is senior scientist at the Institute for Noetic Sciences. He is adjunct faculty in the Department of Psychology at Sonoma State University. He is the article of any number of books of one of the great classics of consciousness, The Conscious Universe. HarperCollins, I believe, published it in 1997. It is now available in paperback. It's gone through at least 20 printings. This is Whitley Strieber. Welcome to Dreamland, and welcome to the new unknowncountry.com. Before we go on to Dreamland, I'd like to talk to you just for a couple of moments about the new unknowncountry.com. There are many new things you can do. You can report a sighting or encounter, do it either anonymously or identifying yourself in our report sighting or encounter link. Every day, the Strange Days section offers you a new strange story for that particular day of the year. In addition, the Out There section is much enhanced. It has direct video access now. The news stories are much enhanced. As you can see, the site itself is really pretty attractive, and it has much more access to archives. You can see just what a large archive we have on unknowncountry.com. Plus, the search engine is now very powerful, so you can search unknowncountry.com. Also, after logging in, when you navigate to the subscriber homepage, you will see the whole archive open up to your right, dated by year and by archive area. We're going to be adding to those archive areas to make it even easier to navigate the vast treasury of info. So, altogether, the new Unknown Country, a huge step ahead. This is the largest website of its kind in the world. It is a vast treasury of information. It has a new, powerful search engine, as well as much more access to the stories and archives we do possess, which are indeed extensive. Thank you very much for coming to unknowncountry.com and Dreamland, and we hope that we deserve the support that you give us.
This is Whitley Strieber's Dreamland 2010, our 10th anniversary year. Whitley Strieber's Dreamland takes you where others dare not go, to the limits of imagination and reality and beyond. Expert hosts like Jim Mars, Marla Fries, Ann Strieber, and Linda Moulton Howe are what make us special. And of course, Whitley Strieber, the world's leading authority on the unknown. Dreamland. Welcome to the edge of the world.
Well, I am excited today. We have not had Dean Radin with us since 2006, and that's way, way too long. In 2006, in September of 2006, for you subscribers, if you would like to listen to this great show, and it is as current today as it was the day it was written more recently. In 2006, he published Entangled Minds, which I thought was an extraordinary book because it explained psychic phenomena scientifically, and that is what Dean Radin does and can do so well. He understands why the phenomenal world, this unusual world that we're all so interested in, is real. Dean, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much, Whitley. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, it's been too long, and I'm very glad to be back. Dean, at the Esalen Institute, you presented a paper that just blew everyone away, and it is a lot of your latest research on things like the way random numbers can be used predictively and in an organized manner. And then you also got into things like the relationship between the Earth and the Sun and what solar energy does to the human mind. And the result of this is, I almost don't know where to start. I think the place to start information on this website. These are just some of our changes. We're looking to do much more. We're going to be expanding our links to other websites section dramatically, for example. So if you have a website you particularly like and would like to see up there, or you own such a website, please send a link to unknowncountry.com. Also, for our subscribers, we have a new $3.95 a month subscription. If you'd prefer to do that, that's now available as well. And it's much easier to subscribe. It's much easier to use the subscriber area. It is much easier to gain your password when you lose it. So that area has all been greatly streamlined and enhanced as well. Dreamland is now available both to listen to on the website and to download from iTunes. You can download it from iTunes by going to iTunes Store, then to Podcasts, then search on Dreamland, and you can even set it to download to your iTunes automatically every week. You can listen on Radio Time on your smartphone or on Wonder Radio on your smartphone as well. And we are looking to restore the download feature from the website itself for those of you who used that. That was inadvertently left out of the website, and we intend to restore it.